right, we are live. We're back with Manny Grossman. And today, Manny, you are bringing me a story of which I know nothing.
Yes, absolutely, Eric. And of course, give me 1 second here to mute my screen there. Yes, and of course, first of all, I'd like to thank you once again for having me. It's been a few months, and in the interim, we have since retired our old subject. We have put Son of Sam to bed, and we've started a new case, and that's the case that we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, so I know that you've already done, and knowing you've done a bunch of episodes. You probably got a deep dive on it, and we're barely going to scratch the surface. So
Correct.
we're within an hour, we're going to start scratching.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're partially correct. We've only done 4 episodes so far, and today's hour-long synopsis that we're going to be doing for your great audience is sort of a wrap-up of those 4 episodes. So if anyone wants to see deeper dives, you can go to my channel, which is in the description. But today we're going to basically bring your audience up to speed on this extremely interesting case. And what's that case? It's the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. So basically, whenever you're ready to start the presentation, I'll start rocking and rolling, Eric.
Yep, for sure. And I guess first off, before we dig into it, do you want to tell us who he is, or is that part of your presentation?
That's part of the presentation, but
right,
I do want to say why I got into it, and of course, this goes to one of your. See, I'm good with intelligence, Eric. I study the people who I work with, and I saw one of your interviews. Where someone was asking you, well, how do you pick your guests and what do you like your guests to do? And basically, and what questions do you like to ask your guest? And the first one was, well, why do you care about this subject? Which of course is a very basic question, but a very, very insightful one. And I care about this because it involves not only my neighborhood, where I grew up and where I still reside, but it also involves one of my childhood friends who was accused of this murder. And quite frankly, after we see today's episode, and if you guys want to do the deeper dive, I'm not so sure what exactly happened on this house on Palisade Avenue here in Riverdale, but that's what we're going to get into today.
Cool. So, and you say Riverdale, and I'm thinking, wait, isn't that like Archie Comics? And
yeah.
You've got that show on, and it's all spooky and weird or whatever.
Yeah, well, this neighborhood, Riverdale, here in the Bronx, a very exclusive community, is actually looking more and more like Twin Peaks rather than Riverdale as we go along, and I think that'll become apparent as we see the players and characters of this story.
All right, so we'll start with the tombstone.
All right. Well, this tombstone right here, guys, and of course, everyone, thank you so much for watching and for your attention. This is the last resting place of Alfred Hunt Howell, and this is a lonely tombstone in a Pennsylvania cemetery. And it just says Hunt, and with no indication whatsoever of who's buried there, and more importantly, who this guy was and why he's potentially so incredibly important for modern researchers into subjects like the deep state, conspiracy world, the CIA, the foundations, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So we're talking about this guy right here, Alfred Hunt Howell. And this is a picture taken of him about a year before he died. This was taken from an article in the local newspaper here called the Riverdale Press, a very interesting publication in and of itself, which we don't have time to get into today. But here he is in his garden. And of course, one of the things that struck me was just how beautiful this guy's arms were. Still at 83 years old, he still had very great muscle tone. And I attribute that, of course, to his lifelong love of gardening. And his family was a very staunch supporter of gardens, both locally and internationally. And we're not talking about little community gardens, guys. We're talking about New York Botanical Gardens, Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. This was one of the main funders of those places, as we will get into as we go along. So this guy, Alfred Hunt Howell, lived on a very exclusive part of the Riverdale community in the Bronx. He lived at 4602 Palisade Avenue, which is known as the estate area of Riverdale. Riverdale is a pretty old community, started in about the 1830s, 1840s, by some of the families that actually Alfred Hunt Howell married into. So this wasn't just a random old guy who was found dead in his house. As we're going to see later, this guy is potentially American royalty. So let's get into it a little more. Well, how did we get into this case in the first place? Well, this was started because this guy Howell was brought into the Son of Sam orbit. And those of you who go back with me and Eric back to the about a year and a half ago know that he has had me on to talk about the Son of Sam case several times. Which we basically solved. So that's why I put it to bed. It's a dead case at this point. Berkowitz did it. And actually, Eric, you were a huge help in sort of bringing me down to earth on that case. Because as you know, I started out as a conspiracist on that and ended up as a basically a believer in the main story. But this Howell case is, in my opinion, a hell of a lot more interesting than Son of Sam ever could be, and actually raises questions such as conspiracy theory, the deep state, and so on and so forth. But Alfred Hunt Howell was brought into this in Carl Denaro's book, and I know you've had Carl on before. And for those who don't know, Carl Denaro is a victim of Son of Sam. He was shot in the second Son of Sam attacks.
Or survivor.
Survivor, correct. I know that right, exactly. So he's a survivor of the Son of Sam attacks, and he wrote a book about 2 years ago called "The Son of Sam and Me: Why I Was Not Shot by David Berkowitz." He's one of the last few remaining people on the planet who still believes that Berkowitz was part of a satanic cult. And in his book, at the end of it, he had a list of characters, a cast of characters in the Son of Sam story. And this guy, Alfred Howell, who was supposedly drawn here by someone who witnessed him in Untermeyer Park, and that's a whole other story, which we're not going to get into today. He was raised as an alternative suspect, raised by another researcher whose real name is not known to me. One of two people suspected of being Mr. Real Estate. Mr. Real Estate is suspected of being the mastermind behind the Son of Sam attacks. Now, of course, we have long since debunked the entire notion of cult involvement in Son of Sam and there being a Mr. Real Estate. The whole thing was made up by an author named Maury Terry in a very fictional book called The Ultimate Evil. But when I saw this, I flipped out because it immediately made me remember that this guy, Alfred Hunt Howell, was found dead in my neighborhood. And then I started to think to myself, wow, local guy here found dead. He was the head of the Son of Sam cult. Wow, this is amazing. And then even furthermore, he was actually allegedly murdered by a childhood friend of mine, a man named Nikolaj Amann, who we'll get into in a little while. So he just had some very staid, very milquetoast, nondescript obituary in the
I'm going to interrupt because I'll forget it. Why, if his name is Howell, is it Hunt on the gravestone?
That's a great question. And I don't know the answer to that. It probably has something to do with the Hunt family that was maybe a little bit more older than the Howell family, or he married into the Hunt family, or there was a Hunt there. I'm not quite sure.
Maybe it's his mother's name or something.
It's possible.
She's of I don't know if the Hunt family legacy, but it just kind of bugs me. And then you say, okay, he was a suspect of something, and in a weird way, his identity is being obscured even on his gravestone. That's odd.
Well, that definitely raises questions. And once we get into who this guy was and who he was affiliated with and who his friends were, it's even going to raise more questions for, I think, your audience. This is a very, very interesting case. But as far as this goes with the Hunt name there, it's just must be that was the family plot, and maybe the Hunt name is older than the Howell name. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to. But here's his obituary, one of a few that were in the local papers. Of course, this is in the New York Times, and we're not going to read it all. It's no point in sitting here reading it all. But Alfred Hunt Howell, 83, book-loving banker. And it talks about his affiliations. And we're going to get into this a little later because it talks about he was the benefactor of the YMCA. He was the director of the Bronx-based Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. And this Dodge Foundation sounds very innocuous and innocent, but as we're going to see, these people are heavy, heavy-duty players, potentially in the American deep state.
Please tell me this isn't going to be going down the same track as that Nobel-winning scientist.
Well, it's starting to look like it may, although we don't have any proof of that. We certainly don't have any allegations that this gentleman was involved in any nefarious activity. But his associations were very curious, and I would actually like to know. And you're talking about the Nobel Prize winning Dr. Carlton Gajusek.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually like to know. And one of the questions I have is, did Gajusek and Howell know each other? But that's something that remains to be seen, and I'm not quite sure that we'll ever really know. But they certainly were contemporaries, and they definitely ran in the same circles. So this guy here, very nice looking old gentleman, he's described as courtly, book loving banker. He was heavily connected. I mean, here we have his affiliations: director of the YMCA, chairman of the Young Men's Christian Association. He had a very big interest in young men and children, actually. Not saying anything there, but it's just the fact. He was involved with children's homes in Yonkers, particularly one called Leek and Watts, which he was very influential at. But he was a trustee of the Frick Connection. He was one of the head people at what's called the American University of Beirut. And I'm just starting to dive into the American University of Beirut, but I already know that in conspiracy literature, this place has come up a gazillion times, particularly with the Mark David Chapman, the alleged shooter of John Lennon. And I only say alleged because I wasn't there. I mean, I don't really know for sure what happened. I guess the official story is true. It's not something that I've really looked into, but you never know with these things. But Mark David Chapman was somehow involved with this, and the American University of Beirut was started by the Dodge family, who and again, here we have that Alfred Hunt Howell was on the board of directors of the Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. Now, this is not the car family, okay? The family involved with the Dodge automobiles. This is a wholly different organization, and this is based here in Riverdale, not in Detroit. He was vice president with the U.S. Naval Reserve, European Theater of Operations, member of Middle East Studies, Century Club, Grolier Club president. He got around, this guy. He was involved in highly elite circles. And of course, he was married, a courtly, gracious gentleman of the old school who favored bow ties and dazzled acquaintances with his smile. Mr. Howell moved to Riverdale in 1946. He was married to Ruth Rhea Howell, a niece of the Cleveland E. Dodge, whose family was one of Riverdale's founding families. Okay, so Dodge. This is a name that your audience is definitely gonna want to remember.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if that's her name post-marriage or pre-marriage. Like, did he adapt her name?
No. He was Alfred Howell. His father was definitely a Howell. And Ruth was her last name was Rhea, and in fact
it was the last name. Okay, so that was her name.
Exactly. Her maiden name was Rhea, and she was a niece of Cleveland Dodge. We're going to get into who Cleveland Dodge was and why he's important, and potentially all of these people are important or not. We don't know. That's the beauty of the mystery of this story. So a year later, okay, the guy is found dead. His obituaries are written. 1996 comes and goes. Nobody thinks anything of this guy again. He's quickly cremated. No wake, no funeral, no autopsy. Interestingly enough, the cops, as we're going to see I'll show you. I'm going to be showing your audience the police reports.
Hang on a second.
Yeah,
Ken, I know his middle name is Hunt. Thank you for shouting it. It doesn't mean anything. I won't be buried with my middle name on the tombstone, most likely. Most people I know aren't buried with their middle name on the tombstone. So thank you for letting us know about his middle name.
Right. And I got to say that, Eric, sometimes it's your questions and observations and you may think that they're nothing, but sometimes they lead us into directions that we never would have thought of. So this Hunt thing is interesting. And of course, we're going to find that out. But Ken had some issues before with the writing of the description. And I don't know. I think I recognize his name as a hater from the Son of Sam days. But in either case, 1 year later, So he's buried, dead. Well, the world has moved on, totally forgotten about. This courtly old gentleman who was found dead in his home in the exclusive estate area of Riverdale, gone and forgotten.
Okay, this is funny. I'm sorry. Let's relate Thurston Howell the Third.
Believe me, this is not the first time we have heard it. And who knows? Maybe this Thurston Howell, the screenwriter of Gilligan's Island, knew Alfred Hunt Howell, and they reminded of him. I don't know the answer to that, but yes, we have heard that before. So a year later, all of a sudden, what goes from a very staid and nothing obituary in the New York Times comes this headline in the Daily News: chilling slay, then snack. The accused killer's account. As the bullet-riddled, and we're not going to read the whole thing, Eric, so don't worry. But as the bullet-riddled body of millionaire Alfred Hunt Howell lay in a pool of blood in his Riverdale mansion, his accused killer calmly strode into the kitchen, looking for something to eat. And of course, this goes on to talk about forensic tests that revealed fragments of lead in his blood. The man tried to grab him, but the defendant kept firing until the man stopped moving. Blood was pouring out everywhere. I mean, very, very strange article, considering that as we're going to see, the cops found nothing suspicious. And there certainly wasn't
I didn't expect bullets. I would expect poison. But whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
So you're saying that he died. They said it was a heart attack.
Correct.
And he was buried like most people who are 80 something years old.
He was he was quickly without an autopsy, quickly cremated. And then
but natural causes often don't have an autopsy.
Okay, fair enough.
That's pretty, I mean, I'd say the majority of deaths don't have an autopsy at all. If it's like, oh, he's old, he had a heart attack, everything looks fine, and nothing. Yeah, why would you?
Right, and we're dealing with this over on my channel because technically, I think if a person is found dead in their home, and there's no the medical examiner is supposed to autopsy that person, but I don't know. I mean, I have since heard that if the doctor signs off that there should be no autopsy, then that supersedes the medical examiner. And for sure, his doctor, without even seeing the body, and that's in the police reports as well, signed off on the heart attack classification of death, and then immediately ship the body for cremation. So yeah, very strange, right? Like, how do all of a sudden a year later we get to the bullet-riddled body with blood pouring out everywhere? I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah, well, yes. Sorry, but I've seen cases where people think they died of natural causes, and then they uncover and say, "Oh, that looks like an entry wound," but not usually a year later.
Correct, especially after the fact that there was no autopsy done, like we said before. So there was no examination of the body to find these so-called bullet wounds. And for certain, when we look at the police reports, there was absolutely nothing about blood everywhere. You would think that if this guy Nikolaj Amann, right, and that's the accused killer right here, Nikolaj Amann, you would think that if he just finished shooting, right, kept firing until the man stopped moving and blood was pouring out everywhere, that when he went into the kitchen to settle his eyes on a box of cookies and one by one eating them, that somehow or other he would track some of that blood around the house, that there would be bloody footprints, that there would be blood on the walls, that there would be some form of evidence that a murder had taken place. Well, not according to the first detectives on the scene. So already this is a very strange case. And of course, here we go is another article in the Daily News as well. Tycoon's heart attack looking like murder. A Bronx millionaire who cops first thought died of a heart attack in '96 might have been gunned down in his Riverdale mansion. Now, it's very interesting. And the reason why I'm reading this right here is because this forensic test performed on Alfred Hunt Howell indicate that there were fragments of lead in his ashes, right? And how it talks about the forensic tests, and Amann's confession raised serious questions. Well, we're going to see those forensic tests, and we're going to see those reports as well, because even those are strange, but we'll get back to that a little later.
Well, I'm just wondering, how do you miss this? I mean, you've got cops on the scene. Detectives. Somebody had to remove the body. I'm sure that even if he was cremated, he still went to some sort of a, if not mortician. I don't know if he was embalmed or not. I don't know if they always embalm, but I think that when they cremate, don't they strip? I mean, wouldn't somebody have noticed something at some point?
Right. I mean, I often ask that in terms of modern music. I say, Jesus, this music has to go through several layers of producers and editors and distributors before it gets out to the public. Doesn't someone realize that it sucks? And so it's kind of
in my case.
but it's some sort of the same thing here. You would think that somewhere down the line someone would have seen these bullet riddled bodies with blood pouring out everywhere and massive amounts. Right. But no, that was not the case. So that's why I'm calling this a very strange death. And you know, we're only at the beginning of this investigation. But Nikolaj Amann, the alleged murderer, he gave 4 different accounts of that night. So and he was busted for burglary a year later, well, 7 months later, and then all of a sudden he starts talking about a murder that he was involved with. That makes no sense either. So we got a lot to get to, but yeah, Eric, you're already starting to see why this case is so weird. So, of course, here is Nikolaj Amann. And, of course, this brings a lot of sadness to my heart. Why? Well, because I was a childhood friend of Nikolaj Amann. Nikolaj came to the United States, I would say in about 1982. He was definitely an immigrant. I originally thought it was from Russia, but looking into his life a little more, he was actually a Danish national. And he, I gotta say, he was a nice kid. Nikolaj Amann was a very, very nice boy. Now, this is from the police reports. He was a resident alien. He did have a social security card. And, well, to prove that I was friends with him, here's our 5th grade class. And here I am right here. Okay, this is PS 24 in the Bronx, in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, 1983, 84. Here I am right here. I didn't realize it until I just looked at this photograph for the first time in many years, but I was the shortest boy in the class. What the hell, man? But and here's Nikolaj up here, right here. And he was one of the tallest and biggest kids in the class right here. So Nikolaj and I were pretty good friends. We were not best friends, but we were pretty close. And he was a very, very nice kid. He was sweet. He had no violent tendencies whatsoever that I remember. But in 5th grade or in 6th grade, I'm not quite sure what year it was. I don't really remember at this point. But he was over at my apartment, at my house, and we were my bedroom was off the kitchen. And every week my father would put in a pouch in the kitchen, $100 for my mom to use to go grocery shopping. And one day after Nikolaj leaves the house, we're hanging out, me and my family, and my mom goes to the pouch and she notices that there's only $4 left in there. And there was like, I don't know, $90, $100 in there. So she asked me what happened and I didn't know. But then we kind of like traced it back to the fact that Nikolaj stole this money. So he was absolutely a thief. And at that point, my mom refused me to ever talk to him again. And I lost touch with him in the sense that we stopped becoming friends. But I noticed after this, and in the subsequent years leading up to the death of Alfred Hunt Howell, that Nikolaj definitely went down a bad road. He was known as a thief in the neighborhood. He was stealing cars. Here's an article from the local newspaper from about that time. The man police suspected murdered a local philanthropist in his home after a bungled burglary, lived in Riverdale as a teenager, and was arrested 3 other times in the neighborhood for other crimes. Now, again, you notice that these other crimes, we're not gonna read through this entire thing here, but these other crimes were property crimes. Okay, he and my recollections, people who they spoke to for this article had the same recollections. He was a quiet teenager, residents of the Greystone Avenue, remember, and an upstairs neighbor recalled Mr. Amann as a polite boy. Okay,
yeah, we can't go by that. I mean, especially a criminal record does not go well into his favor because of escalation over time. Burglary, believe it or not, does tie often to really dark things because of the creeping factor. So again, I can't rule him out. I mean, I understand the nonviolent, question in nature, but often killers, especially those who do things in houses, start off like sneaking and creeping, and burglary can go with that. So.
Right, and I'm totally open to all this, Eric. As I'm at this point, I'm totally agnostic on this case. I don't know what to make of it. I'm as confused as the average person out there. But luckily I have 405 pages of police records to pour through, and we're going to try to make sense. And of course, I'm going to try to do what I did with Son of Sam, which is try to speak to actual principals involved, people who knew him, people who were friends with him, people involved in who might have been in that house.
How about him?
Well, that's a great question. He's a ghost. He's released from prison in 2009. And that you can look up on Prisoner Database, which is a public website run by the state of New York. You can put his name in, and it'll say there's two entries for Nikolaj. One is for burglary, and one is for first-degree manslaughter, which he was eventually convicted of in this case. He's released in 2009. He is never heard from again. We cannot find him. I have people who are involved with intelligence who are looking for this guy who cannot find him. He is a total ghost. He does not exist anymore on the face of the earth, which is strange in and of itself, because you'd figure a person who's my age, 49, and who's gets out of jail would at least be on Tinder or one of these, one of these sites looking for love somewhere. But he just doesn't exist. He's gone. And even more strange, his mother. He was a product of a single mother home.
Could he have been deported?
Well, that's the thing. It says that he was deported. That ICE took him into custody for deportation. But there's no other record of that after. There's no record, at least that I can find, of anything happening after that. So I don't know whether he was actually deported or not. And his mother, we know, changed her name. She became Laura Dean, which was very weird. So, I mean, maybe she just didn't want to be associated with him, but it's not like this was a famous case. But I don't know. There's certainly questions about whatever became of Nikolaj, and the answer is he's a freaking ghost. But I'm definitely hearing you on the whole burglary, creeping around thing. And there's some tantalizing bits of information in the police record that Nikolaj might have been known to that household, that it might not have been random, but that he might have actually been to that house before, or at the very least have had phone conversations with people at that house before. So here he is. He does have a criminal record. But like I said, everybody who I speak to and the way I remember him, he was just a nice, non-violent kid. So it was really shocking to read his name in these articles. Police now say Howell murdered, and so on and so forth. So anyhow, we are now getting into Howell's ties, because here so far in the story, it's just a random old man found dead in his house mysteriously, right? It goes from heart attack to blood pouring out everywhere and bullets hitting everywhere. And here are the police reports showing that. This is the first police report, unfortunately redacted like crazy. But he was last seen here at 5:30, and I have a show on my channel where we go through these with a retired NYPD. Luckily, we found the same report later on, unredacted.
So less redacted.
Less redacted, correct. But this shows that the initial scene, right, 4/24/96. That was the first report, complaint report, right, 50th precinct. Number, everything. He was last seen at 5:30 on the 23rd of 1996. At time, place of occurrence, reporter, that's the cop who was there. Okay. The detective, not sure, probably detective, because it was the precinct detective unit on the scene. States
Probably a cop, because I'd think a beat cop would find him first, and then a detective would come in to look.
Oh, right. Exactly. So it's probably a beat cop who just came to the initial scene. At TPO, reporter states deceased was found by him lying face down in an upstairs hallway to bedroom with a large amount of blood around him on floor. All right, so there we get an indication that there was a large amount of blood around him.
This is the first report?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a large amount of blood around him on floor, but nothing here. But this is really weird. So medical examiner to release body upon family, upon the what we assume is the doctor signing the death certificate. All right, so this says large amount of blood on him on floor. Now, a year later, they do a complaint follow-up where they start interviewing people. Okay. And here it says an examination of the body and scene revealed nothing suspicious.
Other than the blood around him on the floor.
This one doesn't even mention the blood on the floor.
This is weird.
Yeah. Right. So this does not mention anything about blood on the floor. Now, this is the complaint follow-up. This took place. This took place a few days later. Okay. On the 25th. So this was only a day after the initial complaint report here, which was on the 24th.
Mm.
Okay. And now all of a sudden the blood is taken out. Here it says large amount of blood on him on floor. Now, just to be fair, the initial thesis of this was that he had a heart attack, slipped, fell, hit his head on a bureau or a side bed stand or something, and that because he was on blood thinner medication, that he just bled out, right, out of some wound in his head.
That would still spur on an autopsy. Like I said, if he was just laying there or whatever, but I mean, the blood, that might be enough. I mean, to at least find the wound that caused it.
Correct. So there's no talk about anything about a wound, right? There's no examination of the body. There's absolutely no autopsy. There's the doctor immediately signed the death certificate, and they blamed it on a heart attack. Now, I don't know how it came to pass where police or medical examiners and they can say it was a heart attack, right? I thought that only a doctor or the medical examiner could do that. And then, of course, on the complaint follow-up taken the next day, 4/25/96, no mentions of blood. Alfred Hunt Howell was DOA in an upstairs hallway, so he wasn't even in his bedroom where he would have had a bed stand, okay, where he apparently collapsed, and an examination of the scene and body revealed nothing suspicious. All right, so now let's take it even further. Remember the article talked about lead, right? Forensic tests performed on Alfred Hunt Howell indicate that there were fragments of lead in his ashes. So it says here, furthermore in the article, the victim's ashes were exhumed from a cemetery in Pittsburgh and tested for traces of bullets. Okay, so now and so the forensic tests and Amann's confession raised serious questions about how police handled the initial investigation. Eric,
I'm just
you're taking it in.
No, it's bothering me again because why? So okay, you get some idiot burglar bragging about killing somebody. Okay, so you look into it and then you're like, oh, that's the guy who died a year ago. You pull out the report, there's nothing. I don't understand why they would even bother exhuming. I mean, exhuming requires a court order. If you go dig something up out of the ground, it's not exactly a lightweight thing to do. A lot of times people fight over it or whatever.
Right.
They're like, oh yeah, let's go ahead and dig up a jar of ashes, and they look for lead.
And they look for lead
just off of some idiot who's blabbing away saying,
yes,
I'm sorry. And again, maybe he did, but it just doesn't seem normal. Why would they? They didn't bother then. They didn't bother when the guy's dead in a pool of blood. But if somebody goes yapping saying, hey, you know what? I just did all this stuff. Then they pull him up. Why?
Well, there's a couple. Well, first of all, his initial confession, because remember he has 4 of them, But his initial one, he blamed the shooting. He blamed it. He said the guy was shot by two of his friends, not even him. Now, I know that people always deflect, but the answer to your question, Eric, might be in who this guy was and why and how influential he really was. But then that also brings up other questions, which we'll get into a little later. But here we have this newspaper article using the lead found in his ashes. As it doesn't come right out and say it, but it connects enough dots that you think from reading this article that the lead found in his ashes were from bullets. Okay. And that's probably why we had it in that previous article. He was shot everywhere. He kept on pumping bullets into him. Well, I have the police report where they went to the medical examiner about the lead. And it says here very clearly, okay, ADA Castro states that the deceased ashes were retrieved by the Bronx District Attorney's Detective Squad. The ashes were examined by the New York City Police Laboratory for trace metals. The laboratory concluded that the 8 pieces of lead recovered from the ashes would be consistent with levels normally found in the body.
Wait, what? Oh,
yeah. So there's nothing even suspicious about the lead found in his body. So it's like, why are they going with all this salacious stuff in the newspaper that has nothing to do with reality? That's another question which we're trying to figure out. We're at the beginning of this, Eric. Remember, I'm introducing your audience to it, and I'm almost being introduced to it for the first time myself. These are questions that we don't have answers to. In a sense, we're just starting from square one. But we're raising these questions that have never been raised before about this very strange death. So here we have consistent with levels normally found in the body. So all this is complete BS. It takes the
again bullet. A year later, or a year after, he's already been buried. So we don't care. Again, we don't care when he's laying in a pool of blood. But a year later, again, I just can't get over that. I get stuck on things. It's a little OCD.
Well, there's a lot to get stuck on in this case. But the answers to your questions may be because who his friends were.
But then that would make me think that his death would be important. So if it's so important now, that because of his, why wasn't it important a year before? Wouldn't you be like, oh, hell no, this is a big muckety muck important dude. We got to really look into this.
You're asking the $1 million questions that have heretofore never been asked and have not been answered to my satisfaction. And I wish I could say I had answers for you, but quite frankly, I don't. But and that's why we're calling this the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. But it gets very interesting when you find out who this cat was connected to and who his networks were. And I'm calling him American royalty, or at least asking the question, because this guy here, okay, let's look at some of his affiliations, who this guy was. He wasn't just some random dead old man found in some random house in the Bronx. This guy was on the board of directors of what's known as the Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation. Now, to a lot of your audience and to myself, the whole notion of these foundations in the modern American political landscape and what they do and their tax status and where they put money to and what social agendas that they're trying to achieve. This is something that I think is very, very ripe for new researchers to come in and find out about, because these foundations, while they start with these laudable goals, right? And here's Cleveland Dodge, the old scion of the Riverdale neighborhood, right? Whose niece married Alfred Hunt Howell. Okay. Mm-hmm. He was his Phelps Dodge and Company was a major copper mining and manufacturing company. So this was an uber capitalist. I'm not saying anything's wrong with industrialist, right? I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. I have no problem with industry. I have no problem with capitalism. But this is one of the heavy duty players. Cleveland is well known for his lifelong friendship with President Woodrow Wilson, whom he met at Princeton in the late 70s. This relationship manifested itself with a strong interest in foreign affairs. So the Dodge family, they're the ones who started this American University in Beirut, which has then later been linked to, some nefarious activities, which I need to search more. But here's an interesting article I found from the Congressional Quarterly, the CIA and the foundations, right? And this talks about how 46 foundations believed to have been links between the CIA and organizations receiving CIA funds. And these foundations generally fall into 3 categories: dummy foundations, suspected CIA dummies, and established foundations serving as conduits for CIA money channeled to them. So look who's on this list. Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation, 300 Park Avenue, right? Now, just because it's on this list doesn't really mean much, but here's another article I found where, again, the Cleveland H. Dodge Foundation is listed as a CIA cooperator. So my hackles are going up a little bit here, okay? I mean, it would make sense to me that the Dodge Foundation with...
What does it do? What was the
ostensibly they're a charitable organization that's giving money to well, I mean, anybody could go and do, and that's what the research we're doing now. You can go find their Form 990s, which are public. That's the IRS forms.
No, I meant their mission, because like the CIA is infiltrated with National Geographic as an example, very deeply. Why are Doctors Without Borders? Why? Because they're everywhere in the world. So is that something that the Dodge Foundation is doing?
Correct. They're in Africa. They're in the Middle East, but they're also here at home as well. And that's where my interest lies. What kind of social engineering, not to use that shop-worn phrase, Eric, as you know, but what kind of social engineers are these people? And I have some questions about what the Dodge Foundation is up to. But here we already have Alfred Hunt Howell being married into and on the board of the Dodge Foundation, which is already being noted here in 1967. That's when this article was published, as a CIA cooperator. And here's the current board of directors of the Dodge Foundation. Actually, no, this is 2019. And again, you see the same names. Now, we've been going into this more deeply on my channel where we have a little bit more time. But if you look at the names Kerr and Haxall, and look here, Alfred Hunt Howell Jr. is on the Dodge Foundation, right? Rhea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bayard D. Rhea. Ruckert, all of these names go back to the 1920s when these people were involved in insurance companies in New York, banking companies in New York City. These were old families involved in this seemed to be a family affair. And one of the things I noticed with this was one of the names here stuck out at me because Rhea, right? Ruth Rhea Howell. Mm-hmm. And so I looked up this guy, Stephen C. Rhea, a little bit, and I found some very disturbing things, given the fact that he is on the board or was on the board of an uber industrialist, right? A foundation started by mining interests,
sure,
who, et cetera, et cetera. So here's Stephen C. Rhea. Okay. He's involved in towards cashlessness, right? Okay. Getting rid of cash, the cashless society. All right, that is something that people say that these, that the quote NWO wants. They want to bring in a cashless society. Now, here's other things. Now, this is interesting. Here's Stephen C. Rhea. Okay, the eternal question.
What's his PhD in?
He's actually works at Colorado School of Mines. Interestingly enough, mining. So I'm not quite sure what his PhD is in. I should find that out.
He's not a medical doctor, but I don't know.
No,
that just stood out.
No. Good point. He's not a medical doctor, but he's definitely a doctorate of something. But how come a person who is on the board of directors of a uber industrialist foundation with tons of money made by mining interests, why is he promoting a book called When is Capitalism Going to End? Right? Essays about a system in decadence. And furthermore, look at this absolute filth. Now, I'm not speaking for you, Eric. Maybe you agree with this, but that's fine if you do. But I don't understand why in Spanish this guy is talking about decolonizing your ideas, sex and gender are a social construction, and then the single I with this absolute filth.
I don't know. He works at BuzzFeed.
What I'm putting forth is that these people are culture wreckers. that these people are working on a social agenda of division of the working class and of the middle class, and making us all argue about these ridiculous things like social constructions and genders, and meanwhile all this
Critical race theory.
Yeah, critical race theory, what I call spiritual sickness, absolute filth. I mean, this is disgusting stuff here. But it makes no sense. And why is it in Spanish? Are they trying to influence Latin America with this crap? That'd be very similar to what his forefathers did in Beirut, where they went in as missionaries, and really what they wanted was the mining rights and the mineral rights. So here you have the grandson of major industrialists who's on the board of a major foundation founded by bankers and miners, MINERS, talking about ending capitalism and gender as a social construction. And I think this is where all these ideas come from, Eric. I think we have uncovered a nest here, that these are the intellectuals that create these ideas, and then their buddies in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Life, ABC, then pick up on this stuff.
He's an ethnographer.
Okay.
A cultural anthropologist, PhD. Interesting.
Right.
Okay. So
exactly. So now we have another miner here. Okay. MINER. So now the Curlin connection comes in. Remember, this guy Howell was not a local grandfatherly dude who was just a guy who worked as a custodian in a school. He was heavily connected. I'm calling him American royalty. Now, here's where the first notion of the heart attack came out. This guy here, who wasn't a doctor, who was just one of his friends who lived in the right around the corner. Interestingly enough, another person connected with the Dodge family.
Is that who found him?
This isn't the person who found him. He was found by his butler.
Okay.
His butler, yeah.
He had a live-in butler?
He had a live-in butler.
Oh.
And there was also someone else in the house that night as well, his nephew, which we're reading too. So that brings out a whole other can of worms. But getting back to this, just want to show you this guy's deep connections to the U.S. deep state. So here you have Gilbert Curlin, another one of these guys. Here he is, right? He suffered a heart attack, according to his longtime friend and neighbor, Gilbert Curlin. Well, here's Gilbert Curlin, again, associated with the Dodge Foundation. Here we have a visual arts show at a local garden here in Riverdale. And funding was sponsored by Target, the Cleveland Dodge Foundation, and the Sally and Gilbert Curlin Endowment for Environmental Science and Nature Education, right? Sounds all laudable. But then it gets into the whole notion of modern art and what modern art is, because these people aren't funding like, grandma sewing and beautiful folk art. These people,
everybody check out America's Untold Stories, CIA and Art.
Well, here you go, Eric. We've uncovered a nest that you've never heard of before, and I've never heard of before. And let me tell you something. I got nothing against Leah Chang right here. I don't even know who she is with her art installation, but this is absolutely objectively bad. I mean, this is just crap. This is not art. These are three mirrors placed rather poorly, actually, on a mantelpiece, and this is some black horns hanging from a ceiling. I mean, this is not art. This is not uplifting. This is not going to advance the cultural literacy of the American people. In fact, I think, as you may or may not agree, I think this is specifically made ugly to subvert true art and to subvert true creativity. But that's a whole other story. But here's the truth about Gilbert Curlin. He's another miner. Mexican-American family cheated. A South Texas jury has found that a New York lawyer cheated American and Mexican family out of millions of dollars in mineral royalties after a disputed land deal 68 years ago. The jury ordered Gilbert Curlin, a 90-year-old Bronx lawyer, to pay $1 million in compensatory damage. And here he is. He was stealing their mineral resources, right? So this is the truth, right, of these foundation people, of these people who are supposedly our cultural betters, who are promoting the arts and promoting all this great laudable stuff. They're actually in these countries and in other places stealing mineral rights, cheating people. I mean, this is not cool. This is not cool stuff. And what two books that I would suggest the audience read to get a little bit more of a handle on these foundations are Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Renee Wormser, and an excellent book, although this guy has since gone off the rails. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with him nowadays. But Barack H. Obama, The Unauthorized Biography, which talks about the foundation world, the Ford Foundation, and how they were heavily involved with race baiting in New York City. It talks about how the students for the Democratic Society came out of these milieus, and how the Weathermen terrorists came out of these milieus. And we're going to get into that with these cats right here. So here's the guy who's responsible for reopening up the case. So you asked, like, why did this case be reopened a year later? Because one of the most powerful people in New York City, who happened to be a next door neighbor to Alfred Hunt Howell, and who was also the Manhattan DA, he applied pressure to reopen the case. Now, here's this guy, Morgenthau. Okay, Morgenthau. His father, Henry Morgenthau Sr., was Treasury Secretary under Franklin Roosevelt. But interestingly enough, showing these connections between people, here is Henry Morgenthau, this guy's grandfather, because his father was Henry Morgenthau Jr. And look who he's hanging out with. Cleveland Dodge, the same person from the Dodge Foundation.
Again, I repeat myself, but
yeah.
I don't mind pressure for an investigation. My issue is, why did you wait a year? Again, so it's like everything you're saying here, political pressure, the DA, friends, all of that. It makes perfect sense. Really rich dude, we care about him because he's one of us, blah, blah. But why was it a heart attack and then a year later they care?
Well, maybe it all had to do with Nikolaj opening up his big fat mouth. And
whoever listens to a con.
That's a good point. Herein is the big rub of the case, Eric, and you're basically hitting it right on the head, as you usually do. It's a freaking mystery. We don't know why there was pressure to reopen this. If this was a deep state hit, right? Let's just go there. Let's just assume that. Why would they want people to know this? But then again, if it was a deep state hit, they covered it up by blaming some hapless dude named Nikolaj Amann, who may or may not have even been in that house that night.
Or they do nothing. The guy's buried.
But then, but Nikolaj opened up his big fat mouth.
Okay, so he's a crazy goofball cat burglar. What? Yeah, I'm just saying. I fail to understand why.
That's why we're calling this the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell. We're right here at the beginning, right with you, Eric. I mean, that's what makes this so exciting. We're on a journey of discovery, and we don't know what we're going to find. I'm hoping to speak to this guy's family and find out more. I'm hoping to speak to all of these people, the people who are still alive, that is.
Well, this dude's alive. Robert Morgenthau.
Nah, he died a couple years ago.
Sorry. Oh, no, hold on. Wait. Okay, when did he? Oh, 2019. Okay.
Yeah, and so he's another one of these Riverdale cats who lived in
He retired in 2009, right when your boy got out.
Exactly. And taking it back to Son of Sam and the pederasty and the pedophile networks, Robert Morgenthau was one of the biggest cover-ups of pedophilia in New York City by the elite. And we got that from a detective who was investigating all this stuff. He said that Morgenthau was his arch nemesis, that every time he wanted to arrest one of these elitists for pederasty, Morgenthau swooped in and said, nope, sorry, this guy's going free. You're not doing anything about this guy. So Morgenthau is an interesting character who deserves more scrutiny. The fact that his grandfather is hanging out with Cleveland Dodge's granddaughter marries Alfred Hunt Howell. Alfred Hunt Howell's involved in the American Beirut University and the Dodge Foundation.
Who was Nikolaj involved with at the time? And I'm just saying it's great. Okay, you're looking into Hunt. This is cool.
Mm-hmm.
But did Nikolaj know Hunt, who were his friends? What was he doing at the time? How did their paths even cross?
That's the eternal mystery. There is a tantalizing clue in the police reports, which I haven't gotten to yet in the chronology of this series, that shows that the police were investigating 15 calls made by Nikolaj Amann, and they wanted to subpoena the records of Alfred Hunt Howell's home because they had word that Nikolaj had had called the house and had been somewhat known to that house prior to this incident. And word got around Riverdale. I just remember, this is just local lore. I'm not saying that this is a fact, but I remember clearly when this happened, because I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life and I never moved out of it. And I'm connected to a lot of people in this neighborhood. I remember very clearly that word was getting around that Nikolaj was this guy's handyman, that he would go around.
I was just going to ask that because you said that he was everybody liked him, nice guy, blah, 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 blah. Could he have been a day laborer with a good personality and worked on all these people's?
Right. Worked in their homes. Exactly. I mean, that is another one of these eternal mysteries. And the only way I'm ever going to confirm that is by pounding the pavement like I did with Son of Sam and getting people on record. And I've started that process already. Like I said, we're right in the beginning of this. And here is, and we're going to end today's presentation with the last guy in Howell's orbit.
Related to George?
Correct. They're of the same exact Plimpton family. In fact, this family, the Plimptons, go back to the Mayflower. So this is truly American royalty. This guy Plimpton here, he was the president of Amherst College. Okay, and this is a couple interesting things on here. Amherst president-elect hates to drop medicine. Plimpton hopes to create balanced thinkers. He also likes lots of boys around. And if you read this, it's rather sick. They had their boys in Beirut. They were at the Beirut airport when it was getting shot at by people. And this is 1960. Okay. And they're talking about how they put their boys out on the balcony and they were sleeping there when the shooting would start and they weren't sure whether to bring them in or not. I mean, that's kind of weird. And one of the things that struck out at me, I know you've just been doing some JFK stuff.
Read the comment.
What a subhead. Oh, George Plimpton was CIA. Well, there you go. Now, we don't know that to be a fact, Jackie Joe, but I'm sure. I
think he was. It sounds familiar.
Well, wait till you see what this guy Plimpton was up to. Now, this is just my conspiratorial mind going nuts, but doesn't this guy, here's 1960. He's probably a CIA operative. Doesn't he look just like Lee Harvey Oswald? And Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Bronx, right? He came from the Bronx, and this was in the Bronx. I'm not saying that this guy was a stand-in.
Lee Harvey is more known for New Orleans area.
Yeah, but he grew up in the Bronx. He grew up partially here in the Bronx. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. But this was just a fun little article that I found. But more importantly is the African American Institute. Here's another one of these shadowy groups. And Plimpton, the growth and diversification of the Institute, right? Blah, blah, blah. The board of directors. Okay. We're not going to read all these names here. I've blown it up. Here we go. Dr. Calvin Plimpton was the president of the Amherst College. He was on the board of directors of the African American Institute, which, by the way, guys, was started with Ford Foundation money, Carnegie Foundation money, and Rockefeller Brothers Foundation money. Okay, that's who started the African American Institute. And here's an article I found about the African American Institute. A brief history of the CIA's efforts to infiltrate Africa by funding an elaborate network of nonprofit goodwill organizations.
Of course.
And it names here, we're not going to read this whole thing, but the AAI was not what it seemed. This fact emerged in 1967, the same year that other article came out about the Dodge Foundation. Less than 10 years after the AAPC in Accra, blah, blah, blah. Number of American organizations were fronts created by the CIA and were funded secretly through an array of pass-through channels. One of these fronts was the AAI. So here you have Plimpton on the board of directors of a Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundation funded group called the AAI. He is the president of Amherst College. Right when he starts at Amherst College, all of a sudden you have all these black uprisings in the college, which were also done at Columbia University, which was also affiliated with the AAI. I'm starting to get this feeling that these people that Howell were involved with were severe culture wreckers of the American landscape, and they need to be scrutinized. And one of the beautiful things that's so interesting about this case of Alfred Hunt Howell, and we'll end here, Eric, is that this is a dual track investigation. We're looking at the forensics and the weirdness of the crime, and at the same time, on a dual and parallel track, we are looking at Howell's connections and influence. And the two may or may not meet. We're not sure yet. We're at the beginning of this whole thing.
Mhm.
But this is what makes this entire story to me so tantalizing. And that's why I'm calling it The Strange Death of Alfred Hunt Howell.
All right. It sounds better than The Strange Death of Some Dude You Never Heard of. Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, obviously, folks, follow Manny. He may check back in here in a few months or whatever, because I'm a little dilettante. I'm like, oh, here, well, what's new?
No, only have me
right.
back on this one when I have something to report. But yeah, your audience can. We already have 4 episodes of this. Each one is well over an hour and a half long. So you guys got a lot of meat there that we didn't get into in today's basically a primer show here on Eric's. But boy, was this important, Eric, because I feel like this is that we're exposing a nest of vipers that have never been exposed before. The Dodge Foundation, the Plimptons, the AAI, the whole notion of the Weathermen and the Students for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, CIA involvement in the press and operatives, their operatives working in media. It's all
Look
here.
at other things to look at is, where did he go to school? Look into that.
Who?
Hunt.
He went to Princeton.
Okay. And so we've on the same track as Wilson. I was gonna say, but just look at these things, like, where did he go to school? Look for Jesuits. If there's CIA Jesuits are involved, it just is this weird parallel. You mentioned Oswald. I think just from what I've seen, is very briefly in New York. I don't think it was a lot of time, but anyway, find out.
Right.
There's a family. There are certain families that tie to the CIA. Again, America's Untold Stories. A lot of CIA stuff in there. Families of CIA. Everyone check that out. But it's that principle, and look for family names. You're on track there right now with family names. CIA loves families.
Right. And we're seeing that the same operatives who were doing stuff back in the day with these RIAs are still out there today. RIA still out there pushing out their cultural wrecking filth, in my opinion. So yeah, it's a prescient story, and I'm super glad you had me on today.
All right. Well, Manny, thank you so much. And folks, check out more from Manny, and hopefully we'll have him back. If you like this kind of thing, consider subscribing. I obviously do a little bit of true crime. We do some body language analysis. I've got half of you'll cringe, half of you'll be interested, but a Prince Harry breakdown coming up. Unfortunately, it's been copyright blocked from YouTube, so I'm fighting with that right now, but that will be coming out. And please consider subscribing. Definitely go over to Manny. There is a link in the description. I know that there have been a couple links that have flown by in the chat, and check them out.
Thank you, Eric.
Manny, thank you